joining us on the last day of the conference. I know people are probably pretty tired, and or maybe you're really excited and you don't want to leave yet. Either way, we are glad you're here with us today to talk about AI governance and trust and safety. I think we're going to kick it off with a question for the both of you, which is there's been a ton of change in the last 3 to 4 years in the AI space ever since ChatGPT exploded and workforces and companies started really deploying AI within their companies at all levels of employment. So when you're thinking about governance and accountability, what are the biggest things that have changed in the past 3 years? And we can start with you, Navrina.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you right here who was clapping because you're at least very excited about governance. We like it. I am Navrina Singh, founder and CEO of Credo AI. 6 years ago, we created the AI governance category. So as you can imagine, that was in the predictive ML space, and now we are in the agentic era. So a lot has shifted.
Yeah.
And the first biggest thing that has shifted, Ashley, is we are moving from just like the policy talk to actually operational and runtime guardrails, which is actually a very important shift because you can't do governance just once. You have to do it continuously.
Yeah.
The second big shift that we've seen is it has become more contextual because as you can imagine, the frontier models can be applied to so many different use cases, but you can't have like a just generic approach to guardrailing these systems. So how do you actually think about industry specificity, AI use case specificity is so critical in making sure that context is embedded in these runtime guardrails, and that is really critical. And then the last thing which is important, and we've seen a massive shift been in the space for 6 years, is become more continuous. So even if you're looking at buying a third-party AI system, you can't just at the time of procurement make a decision that is this a system that's going to work in alignment with my objectives. That even in the procurement, you have to keep doing that continuously to make sure that the safeguards as well as accountability is met on a continuous basis.
So how does that change how you speak to your customers and the different people that you service? Is it really unique to each individual client or company that uses Credo?
Absolutely. So a couple of big things. One is we are seeing like the governors and builders are sort of coming together. There used to be a chasm between the level of AI literacy that the governors have versus the level of capabilities that an AI expert has. And we are seeing that really the gap getting closed very quickly. And that is really important because as you talk about runtime governance, you have to be able to use AI systems so you understand that so that you can govern them. So that's a pretty big shift. And then the second thing that, is you really need to understand very deeply your business context because rest of the knowledge, which is coming from policies, controls, risk, that is commoditized. But when you marry that with your business context, that's when magic happens.
Mm-hmm. And Saahil, we were talking about why you.com pivoted from being AI-powered, just sort of general consumer-facing search to what you're doing now, which is search APIs for agentic AI agents. So can you talk a little bit about why you guys made that pivot and how you're generally thinking about governance in the context of what you're working on now?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So, at U.com, what we're really building is the leading search APIs for AI agents. We believe that there's a paradigm shift happening right now when it comes to search. Search has typically been designed for humans. When we interact with search, it's often through Google. You type in a query, you get a list of 10 blue links, and then you either click on it or you make a decision based on it. What we see happening is the majority of searches in the future will not be by humans. It'll be by AI agents. And this is one of the reasons for our pivot. We actually started out in 2020 as a consumer search engine focused on being a competitor to Google. But then what we realized over time is that there's an even bigger, more exciting opportunity for us due to the paradigm shift that came with AI advances. And this has also led to a host of interesting governance questions. One example is when it comes to humans have certain, they make judgments in certain ways, but agents, when they're consuming information, can often, they don't have that same ability to self-correct often. They will essentially use the context that they're given and cite it without, in some ways in a way that, does not include humans in the loop. So what that essentially means is that when it comes to grounding agents, it's really important that the underlying data is extremely high quality, trustworthy, and when answers are generated by agents, they have citations. And these are all core to our philosophy, is in some ways, focusing on making sure that we can arm agents with really high quality information, provide provenance via citations, and essentially evaluate our services so that our customers know that they're using benchmarked APIs.
Because I guess if you're not doing the search yourself and seeing the result and being able to check it yourself and it's just sort of running in the background, you want to be able to totally trust that what it's pulling up is right, because you're not necessarily checking it if it's running without you. Is that how it works?
Exactly, yeah. So when we see a lot of people using these agents, they're trusting the agents to do really important work for them. And that trust comes down to the tools that the agents have. At a really high level, we see there being, two classes of companies, essentially, what we call core intelligence companies. These are companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, et cetera. And then what we call augmented intelligence. These are companies building the tools and services for AI models. And we want to make sure that we're augmenting these core models in ways that are really responsible. And it comes down to having really trustworthy tools to make sure that these agents can be trusted by users.
And you say that in the future, web search and consumer-facing search won't be as popular as AI search. Is that because everyone's going to be using AI agents and AI applications instead of just going to Google?
Yeah, I think there's a couple reasons for this. One of which, and we already see this, right? So if you look at the number of queries that Google serves through its overviews, it's increasing over time. If you look at ChatGPT adoption, Gemini adoption, people are now expecting, different responses from search, essentially. And what we're seeing is that people are going to be interacting and are already interacting more with agents than they are with the underlying APIs. So what this basically means is agents are going to be doing that work that humans used to do. And this is a trend that we see continuing in the future. And there's a host of startups right now that are being formed that are kind of accelerating this trend.
I wanted to pivot back to regulation a bit, because that's my specialty. So when I think of AI governance, I think of it as responsible AI companies sort of coming up with their own rules or agreeing on rules with other companies and other sort of industry groups or non-governmental organizations, and say, hey, maybe there's not super specific rules from the government yet, at least in the US, but here are what we think the best practices are, and here's how you can run AI really responsibly while you maybe wait for federal rules. So as the regulatory environment has changed around the world, how are you thinking about the role of governance platforms while we sort of wait for regulators to catch up?
Yeah, what a great question. But I want to build on something that Saahil said, which is so important, because even in governance, one of the big shifts we are seeing is sort of removing human from the governance loop and actually having these autonomous systems do oversight. And so one of the key things when you actually have agentic systems doing that oversight, what becomes really critical is not just the end decision, but how that decision was made and the provenance of that decision, right? And so going back to how that ties to regulations is first and foremost, I've been advising the US government, European government, Australia, India on a lot of these AI governance frameworks. There's a massive lag. They're not able to keep pace with the AI capabilities. So what we are seeing emerge happen is one, every company is deciding on what does good look like for them. Because there are no existing playbooks that you can use from previous software revolutions, you really are creating the playbooks as we speak. And so that's why you'll hear a lot of companies going through pivots, including us. And the reason for that is all the rules that worked in the past don't work now. So the first thing we are seeing is companies really sort of taking stock of what does good look like for them and what are the policies they can stand behind. Because if they can, one, very technically measure the outcomes and demonstrate to customers that within the constraints that I know and within the context of my use, here are things I'm going to hold myself accountable to. And here are the ways I've done testing, evaluation, oversight, that this is the way I'm proving to you that within what I have decided, I can prove to you I'm doing the thing. So that's one shift we are seeing happen within enterprises. The second thing that we are seeing is the rise of what we call the IVOs. So these are independent verification organizations. For the longest time, if you are a startup, you're trying to meet the SOC 2 standards, and we've been pushing hard for SOC 2 for AI, and that itself has taken a long time. So what's happening now is emergence of standards like AIUC, where there is a very clear methodology on how you're going to be testing these agentic systems. And you actually have independent verifiers who come in and test those systems and prove against these standards, are you doing the right thing? So I would say that there's a industry getting formed right now around top AI companies creating their own standards and then sharing that with the rest of the ecosystem. Having said that, there's a third thing that's happening in the regulatory ecosystem. There are already existing rules that apply to a lot of machine learning based outcomes. The same don't apply to agentic systems. So what's happening is the policymakers and regulators are trying to augment that, whether it is in Colorado with the Colorado Act, thinking about impact assessments, whether it is bolstering, the privacy regulations or transparency requirements from frontier model labs. So we are seeing that happen, but it is much more slower.
And internal governance at your own organization to make sure your AI is running correctly, that's always going to be necessary, no matter what federal regulators around the world are doing.
It's such a great point, Ashley, because I think many companies, when we speak to them and they're like, let's wait for an incident to happen, and then if we need to invest in AI governance, guess what? By that time, they're going to be irrelevant. So I think it's really important to think about, one, governance as foundational, but also governance is becoming a competitive moat. So to, the very fact that Saahil was mentioning that U.com has tried to invest in governance, that itself is so critical, because I, as an enterprise, when I'm making a decision, should I be buying U.com, I'm actually going to be looking under the hood and saying, can I trust this company? How have they done their testing? Where are they getting data from? What kind of agents are they building? What is the evaluation harness for those agents? I'm going to be looking under the hood to make a decision. Is U.com a trusted vendor I should be bringing into my ecosystem? And so I'm very excited to see them actually using governance as a competitive moat.
Sahil, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I think that's really well said. Said better than I would have said it myself. But yeah, no, we do see governance as a moat. At the end of the day,
what do you guys mean by that? You see it as a moat?
So maybe I can give my take.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious yours.
Happy
What
to.
we basically see is, again, we're going from this shift from, developing search for consumers. This is kind of Google, et cetera, to developing search for agents and enterprises at the end of the day. And because we're very enterprise focused, for us, governance is extremely important. An example of this is just having, the basics like SOC 2 compliance down, making sure that we're, abiding by, regional standards in Europe, et cetera. These are necessities when it comes to enterprises. And that's why, when it comes to adoption, we see governance as being extremely important, and not just kind of a nice to have, but a critical feature. In some ways, I view it as a necessary but insufficient condition to driving adoption among enterprises in a global market.
Just to give you a little bit context, so we work across 10 different sectors, everything from financial services, pharma, healthcare, to CPG, retail, media. And what we are seeing is, and since we work for Fortune 500 clients, many of them are adopting third-party AI tools. And last year, what we saw was they were just going and betting on a lot of the same tooling for the same problem that they were trying to solve, because they were prototyping with a lot of these third-party vendors. And as you can imagine, there's a plethora of AI native companies that have emerged just in the last 12 months.
Right.
If I am Cisco or if I am Disney, I want to make sure that I'm not just getting a vibe-coded startup to come in and basically get access to my entire enterprise data. So the third-party risk management processes that the enterprises have are very robust. And SOC 2 does obviously meet the requirement. But in the AI world, there's much more scrutiny around, is my data going to be protected? Have you actually aligned to your own accountability standards? What are those? Show it to me. So what we are finding is Fortune 500 clients now, after having gone through a lot of prototyping, are coming down pretty heavily as they're making decisions on AI native companies to say, is this the right partner for me in the long run? And are they going to expose me to additional risk? Or is there an upside in bringing their AI into my organization, whether it is for customer success or whether it is for marketing?
And do you think that those CEOs, those Fortune 500 companies, are being a little more measured and careful in what tools they decide to deploy, having been a couple years into this sort of hype and craze than maybe they were a couple years ago.
Oh, absolutely. There's a very interesting new Gartner study which talks about only 40% of the vendors now are actually getting into production in these Fortune 500 companies, because last year was the year of experimentation. Let's just try it all. There's so much exciting stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
From, Lovable to 11 Labs. There's so much cool stuff happening. But now things are serious. I'm going to be putting this in production. Can I guarantee to my customer that their privacy is going to be preserved, etc.?
Past the experimental phase,
Exactly.
you have to know it's locked in. It's going to be working for you.
Exactly.
And also, when I think about who's using AI, what sort of like employees at companies are ultimately in charge of implementing the governance program, interfacing directly with Credo, and sort of carrying out through the organization? What type of employees are you seeing do that?
Yeah, there's not one standard model that we work across. So, for example, some of the Fortune 500 companies have a centralized AI governance team. And the makeup of that centralized AI governance team is actually very multi-stakeholder. It has obviously data scientists, it has governance, risk, privacy personnel, it has psychologists. It has a very interesting, unique makeup that is required to understand the various categories of risk that AI is introducing, not just the traditional fairness, security, reliability ones, but as you start thinking about adversarial attacks, toxicity, etc. But we are also seeing some of the Fortune 500 companies have a federated model where they might have an AI governance council comprising of their CISO, CIO, CTO, but the federated model is really where, let's say, the AI builders are embedding governance practices where they are building. So, for example, Credo AI recently launched our governance MCP in beta, as well as a governance MD file, which is basically, if you're building an agent, how do you actually guide the agent to do the things that you want it to do in a way that is aligned with the company policies? So in that case, we are seeing more builders get excited about using that governance guardrails at the time of building, rather than just the governance risk compliance folks coming in to do oversight.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's at a very interesting time right now when it comes to AI governance. And I do see internally, when we're thinking about governance, it is extremely multi-stakeholder. So, it involves our security, it involves our product teams, design, engineering. It really is a whole host of folks. And I do think there's a lot of space for using tools like Credo, et cetera, to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that we're ultimately guiding our AI models to be very trustworthy. And at the end of the day, that's kind of core to what we do when it comes to search. We want our search APIs to also guide AI models to be trustworthy by providing them with the right data. But internally, it also starts with making sure that our own development processes and our own agents under the hood are also being governed correctly. So yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense.
So when you started Credo, the scene of AI was very different. How did you sort of have the foresight that governance was going to be such an important part of this industry?
So I might look very young, but I've been in this industry for 20, 25 years. And prior to starting Credo AI, I spent multiple years building AI products at Microsoft, Qualcomm. And it was really interesting because the glaring gap between the ML ops, AI ops, and the personas that are building those tools, primarily data scientists and AI leaders, and on the other side, the governance, risk, and compliance folks, which are primarily coming from policy and risk posture. It was really fascinating to see that these two set of tooling and personas, they never wanted to interact.
Yeah.
They hate being in the same room. They don't have the common language. And what was really clear was after a multiple set of high-profile failures in some of the products that we had launched in these companies, it became clear that there was a last-mile problem that needed to be solved.
Yeah.
And the solution was Credo AI. How do we bridge the gap between the traditional MLOps, agent ops systems and the GRC systems? Because as the AI capabilities increase, you certainly will need a much more multi-stakeholder oversight to make sure you're addressing all the risks that exist in these systems. Just to give you the gravity of that situation, At Credo AI right now, we have the largest repository of AI risks in the world, about 1,600, and we have mitigations for only 85% of those. So this is where we work a lot with red teamers and other groups to really figure out, as new threats are emerging, how do we actually provide mitigations? And it's a very complex problem, and only getting more complex with multi-agent systems.
Is it your sense that clients that you take on at you and people that are using Credo systems, does it feel like they're waking up to sort of the importance of really ensuring everything is buttoned up and clean and that they can trust it within their company? Are you seeing that shift within the folks that you're serving?
Yeah, maybe I can go first. Absolutely. I mean, this is kind of one of the major shifts we've seen as we've been focusing, laser focus on enterprises, is the types of questions they ask. So the very table stakes questions they ask are questions like, do you have SOC 2 compliance? If you're operating in Europe, how do you handle and abide by certain regulations? Do you have zero data retention? That's an example of something that we do and that we're capable of doing because we're focused on building a lot of our technology, being able to provide guarantees, zero data retention, no model training. We care a lot about enterprise data, and we're very aligned with our customers, which is why we're able to do these types of things. We're not building, a competitive, search engine, et cetera. What we're focused on building are the APIs that power these companies, and we want to make sure that enterprises feel very comfortable using our APIs.
Yeah, great.
Trust is a hard problem, and I don't think we've scratched the surface of what good looks like. And I don't think there's going to be a unified framework. So the more,
me neither.
the more the companies and the leaders within those companies can start using AI to understand how these systems work, the better governance they can do for these systems. And more importantly, as we go into agentic area, what's going to be really critical is how do I trust the outcome of an agent? You need to have all the skill set as well as AI literacy to be able to make those determinations.
Okay, awesome. Well, on that note, we are out of time, but I so appreciate you guys talking, and have a good rest of your conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.